Hi, my name is Hana Berhe, and this is my presentation on the global environmental issue of lead-acid used battery recycling. I'm a student in environmental science in the School of Global Public Health. So, to begin this presentation, we will go through the table of contents. We will first discuss the background and the risks of lead-acid recycling. We will then introduce our professionals, and we will then discuss the professionals' approaches. And then from there, we will assess the approaches and then reflect on the lessons learned, and then we will have references. So to begin off, what are lead-acid batteries? Essentially, lead-acid batteries are an older technology that has existed since the late 19th century. It's a rechargeable battery that French physicist Gaston Palit invented. So the big appeal of lead-acid batteries was their relative low cost and their long life. So that's actually why they're primarily used in motor vehicles and numerous items as well. They're essentially composed of a negative electrode made of a spongy lead and then a positive electrode made of lead oxide. These two then come and are submerged in an electrolyte of sulfuric acid. And lead-acid batteries are used extensively throughout the world. And in China in particular, they're used in 75% of their new solar photovoltaic system, which is basically 5% of the entire lead-acid battery market. And they were expected to hold 10% by 2011. 70% of lead-acid batteries are used for vehicles, 21% for communications, and then 4% for other applications. So what are the risks of lead-acid recycling? What are the environmental and health issues? Lead-acid batteries require a huge level of handling. So if they're discarded improperly, it can cause numerous environmental and health issues. And the majority of lead consumption in the world actually is from lead-acid batteries. And improper removal and discarding can cause health issues to those that live near waste removal sites. This is really important. These health issues include brain and kidney damage, hearing issues, and learning difficulties. So the chemicals in lead-acid battery, aside from health issues, can contaminate and pollute solid and groundwater. So this is also an environmental issue as well. So for our interview questions that we are going to present to our professionals, essentially we're going to ask, what do you know about lead-acid batteries? What are your thoughts on lead poisoning? Have you heard about the impact that they have had, especially in developing countries? Do you know the environmental impact that lead-acid batteries have on our planet? And what do you think should be done to reduce lead poisoning and the impact it has on the environment and health of others? And do you believe that stricter guidelines and laws, along with your suggestions, can change the way that lead-acid batteries are handled currently? So our professional number one is Zachary James. He's an environmental biological engineer. So Zachary James had knowledge on lead poisoning from his undergrad studies in engineering. However, he was surprised to hear of the incidence of lead poisoning from lead-acid batteries. And he was made aware of how improper handling of lead-acid batteries can lead to many environmental issues. So from our conversation and from our questions and learning further about lead-acid batteries, he recommended that communities near waste removal cities be aware of the risks in their area and how to recognize symptoms of lead poisoning. He also believes that there should be stricter guidelines on the disposal of batteries. Moving on to professional 2, his name is Sahale Abebe. He is the director of the SOS Children's Village in Ethiopia, which is in East Africa. So Mr. Abebe, he is a humanitarian worker. So from there, having that experience, he has knowledge on lead poisoning from his work in third world countries. He was aware of the high incidence of lead poisoning from lead-acid batteries, and he has experience working with communities on lead poisoning awareness. So after he learned even further about lead-acid batteries from our question and discussion, he mentioned that his company SOS works with orphan children, many of whom live near these waste removal sites, and that relocation and education is a primary goal for SOS to prevent lead poisoning and to better dispose of lead-acid batteries. In the end, he believes that to further reduce the incidence of lead poisoning from lead acid batteries and to limit environmental impact, he thinks that governments and engineering companies need to work hand in hand to create stricter regulations as well as major oversight at these waste removal sites. As we move on to our last professional number 3, his name is Joseph Berhe, and he is a civil engineer. Our discussion with Joseph Berhe led to recognition that he had knowledge on lead poisoning from his personal childhood experiences in rural Ethiopia. And he was aware of the high incidence of lead poisoning from lead acid batteries, not only from his childhood experiences, but from his work as a civil engineer. He believes that governments need to be held accountable for lack of regulation over these waste sites and for reluctance to pass stricter laws. He also stated that to further create action on reducing the incidence of lead poisoning, that education is a necessity to bring an awareness to the issue at hand. He made sure to emphasize that these communities aren't naive to the issue. They just don't have the resources to move away from these waste sites. He believes that waste removal sites should not be in proximity of these communities. So as we assess our approaches, we see that professional number 1 wants to bring health education to these communities and near waste sites and how to recognize symptoms of lead poisoning. Professional number 2 wants to bring governments and engineers together in a working effort to create stricter regulations and oversight at these sites. Professional number 3 wants to work with communities to recognize the issue at hand and hold the government accountable in those specific countries. Our lesson learned from this interview process and from our further research into lead poisoning is that education and impact to communities can bring awareness to lead poisoning symptoms. Stricter regulations and major oversight is needed at these waste removal sites. And governments and developing nations need to work with scientists and engineers to fix the issue at hand. Lead acid used battery recycling is an issue that impacts our planet and low-income communities severely, and more awareness is needed to improve this problem. Here are our references. Thank you so much.